He was gassed in the trenches. Ooh. And so his health was in some ways broken. They said you should work outside as much as you can. He had some mistakes because over the years he cut off a good number of his fingers. Unfortunately for him, a finger that remained was one which people give a threatening gesture sometimes to other people.
So Casey, I know this is a little out of date, but
oh no, that's the way I think of you.
Yeah, thank you. How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
When that came around, I found that very funny because I think about the Roman Empire a lot. As a Christian, as a scholar of the scriptures, you have to understand that worldview. So I know I'm kind of in the minority in that respect, but I thought about the Roman Empire probably a weekly basis.
See, and the same applies to me. We read scripture daily, in the Mass and things like that. We read it weekly. And so I think about the Roman Empire a lot. And the people online, I'm just not so sure. Like, I feel like after a while, they knew what the gimmick was. And so they were like, oh, yeah, twice a week, every other week, something like that. I'm like, okay, sure.
I think men just wanted to seem like they were more civilized, like they knew about the ancients. And they, oh, of course, yes, I read Cicero all the time. No, you don't.
Right.
You've seen Gladiator once, and that's it.
Right. I know Caligula's a name.
Yeah. Well, in a different world, I think if we were to do this, I think we could ask, how often do you think about the 13th century? And, for us, that would be pretty much every day. But for our guest today, it would be probably every moment of every day. I mean, when you think about the things that he's done, he can not only think about the 13th century, but knows everything that happened in it and can translate from the original language, which makes for a very interesting guest today. We hope that you will enjoy our guest today. We've got Father Dominic Monti. Welcome, Father Dominic, a professor, a man who was once our vicar of formation, a brilliant man. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Dominic, how are you doing today? You were up at St. Bonaventure University?
Yes, I am.
What do you do these days?
Well, the last couple of days, although I'm not in school administration of things, the last couple of days I've been busy because we've had a meeting of the Board of Trustees of the university this past weekend. And so we were invited to go to a number of things. I officially retired from the university earlier this year when I hit my 80th birthday. But I'm still doing
congratulations.
Still doing things for the university. In fact, I was just asked last night by the president to see if we could put together something later this spring for the 200th anniversary of the birth of the founder of our university, Father Pamphilo de Maliano. And
wow, so no rest for the weary.
Well, no.
80 years old, you're trying to retire. They still give you authority.
No, well. I think the actual origin of that phrase is "no rest for the wicked," so maybe that's appropriate.
Well, you would know. You are the history professor, and you've been doing it for a long time. Because I know, a lot of people, they get their degree, and it takes them forever, and they're like 40 years old before they start teaching. You started teaching pretty young, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I started teaching actually. My first assignment after I was ordained. In 1971 was to start teaching church history that fall, actually here at St. Bonaventure on the campus then of Christ the King Seminary that was part of the university at that time. So I taught church history really to others, to the seminarians that were studying here, a few sisters and lay people at that point, but still at that point, mostly seminarians studying for different dioceses. So I taught here for 2 years with that. So I started teaching almost immediately after my formation. So
was that nerve-wracking? I mean, here you are, potentially younger than some of the guys you're teaching. I mean, did you feel like you were knowledgeable enough? Did you feel like you had experience enough, or were you always doubting yourself?
I never doubted myself in terms of my knowledge of the material. Good. At that point. One of my professors, Father Damien McElrath, gave me reassurance. He said, remember, you know more than they do. And that always gave me confidence, I think. But the guys who have been ordained now, almost 50 years, are still comment. Oh, you were a good teacher even then, So I thank them for their compliments, and but so I think I just wanted to say this. I was very fortunate as a young friar because what I was interested in doing dovetailed with what the order wanted me to do. So what I wanted to do...
That's not always the case.
What I wanted to do was very much what they thought my talents were and what they thought I should be doing. So that's a big help. That my own mentors in the order, I had two mentors who ended up both as presidents here at the university, Father Reginald Redlin and Damien McElrath. I had at different levels of formation. Reginald, when I was studying philosophy, still as an undergraduate technically, and then Damien McElrath when I was a student in Washington. And actually he was my model. He was my church history instructor when I was a student in Washington, and I really patterned myself in many ways on Damien's methods. I had a 2-semester course in Washington, that introduction, but basically I didn't have any more church history really until I started teaching it. And when I started teaching it up here, it was a 4-semester survey. So, but I had a great framework that Damien had given me in terms of how I would structure church history, and I was able to build on his course immensely. So I started off
So,
very well trained.
that brings to mind a question that I have. Is this where you got your sort of interest in, shall we say, the juicier parts of history? You have a little bit of a reputation for finding the dirt in the cracks of history.
Yeah, people.
For the listener and viewer at home, Dominic is a great storyteller. So not just history and the facts. You think history, you think, oh, this happened in this year. It's so dry and boring. No. Not with Dominic.
I mean, a lot of people remember the stories, unfortunately, but they do remember. They do remember also, I think, the main point. In other words, you have to give them the big picture. And the important thing is that people grasp the big picture and what's really going on at a particular historical epoch. But it doesn't hurt to illustrate it with stories. The important thing is to get them, because if you just focus on the stories and there's no big picture, and then all this, you just got a lot of historical junk in that sense, or trivia, which is interesting but doesn't prove anything.
So, for instance, one of the things you taught us, was that there was some contention between the Franciscans and Mendicants and the diocesan guys. We were slightly different. And I just remember, you could tell that very boring, like, oh, we had a different charism. Or you could tell it the way you did, which is the chronicler of Salimbene, who had some interesting encounters with the friars.
Well, yes.
Do you remember some of those good ones you could tell?
The friar of Salimbene is very interesting. His actual baptismal name was Oni Bene, all good. And when he joined the order, older friar said to him, "Hey, brother, nobody's all good but God alone. Rather, you're solemn, Bene. Right. You picked a good thing by coming in this outfit." Because you think of that the word solemn in Italian is coming from the root word to jump. So people are familiar with the Italian veal dish, saltimbocca. So it's general. That's in Italian. Literally, it jumps in your mouth. It's so good, it leaps in your mouth. So, but he's Salimbene. You jumped into a good thing, Brother Salimbene, when you decided to become a Franciscan. But Salimbene was very interesting because he was a bright guy and was sent on as a young friar to study at Paris. But as one of the his biographers said he was always ready to drop his breviary and rush out into the street to see what was going on.
Bit of a gossip, maybe.
Yeah, very much.
Skinny was.
Very much.
Spill the tea.
Very much a gossip. But because of the privileges that the friars were giving, and this was part of the tension that existed between the diocesan clergy and the Franciscans, and also the Dominicans, because we were both getting, as the new mendicant orders, a lot of new privileges, and that many diocesan clergy said, hey, these mendicant orders are cutting in on our turf. This was something new. Monks were in their monasteries. They weren't out there, in a sense, quote, competing with the secular clergy. If you wanted to get your service of a monk, you went to the monastery and sought them. But the friars were out preaching in the streets. The Fourth Lateran Council, for example, had said, they mandated what we know as the Easter duty, but they said in the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, they said, you have to go to your own priest for this Easter duty, your pastor, which was a way of the pastor getting to know what was going on in his parish and to see the status. Now, the friars are saying, we can hear your confession. And, people said, I can go to this friar who doesn't know me and can care less, and make
some things never change,
and make my confession and wipe myself clean without a lot of baggage. There was jealousies, and it got into actually a theological dispute at the University of Paris of what is the rights of religious as active clergy in the church versus what are the rights of the secular clergy. And so that
I seem to remember this coming to a head in a story about a pie.
Oh! That's one of the... Yes, actually, Salimbene told...
Could you refresh my memory?
Well, yes, Salimbene, as I said, is a gossip. And in this case, he retells a story that the Holy Father, and I'm trying to remember which one it was at the time, told St. Bonaventure when he was general minister of our order. And he was telling him why he wanted to entrust the friars with the hearing of confessions, because unfortunately the standards among many diocesan clergy were not the best. Another little trivial point, the confessional as we know it did not come into use until after the Council of Trent in the 1500s, and it was St. Charles Borromeo who was one of the leaders of the movement for the confessional. Why? Was to assure privacy for women going to confession so they did not have to go to priests, quote, in the open. Because, as the Pope told St. Bonaventure, I can't trust a lot of my clergy. Why I want the friars, the Dominicans and Franciscans, to hear confessions is they're upright people, not making the moves on women penitents. And he told a story of why he was doing this. Again, this is the Holy Father telling St. Bonaventure, I heard from a priest who knew a woman, and she was sexually abused by a priest, and she was determined to get him. And so she fashioned a beautiful hot pie, but she doctored this pie with a considerable amount of human excrement. So the priest got this wonderful pie, still hot from the oven, from this woman penitent, and he goes rushing to open it up.
Other things as well.
And he's saying, the Latin says, et abhorruit. He went, ah! What's this? But the Holy Father said to St. Bonaventure, and good for her, that she wasn't taking literally anything from this priest. But it shows you
Yep.
the condition of, unfortunately, so many clergy at the times, and why the new mendicant orders were finding a big audience among the lay people, is because the early friars were preaching by their way of life as well as their words, that they were people living the gospel, and therefore the Holy Father said, you should be preaching the gospel.
So Dominic, you're probably cursed in that you know too much. You know every little detail. Tito and I took your classes. We know a little bit. But if you could go back and think about 800 years of Franciscan tradition, the impact that we've had as friars, what stands out to you as the most significant or most interesting that we don't always get credit for?
I think probably looking back at it, and it's something we're wrestling with today, really, is how do you become people of your own time and place, and yet have the vision to be able to challenge those people in that same time and place. That the great mission effort of the friars to get to know people of various cultures. I was rereading a history of the Franciscan order by actually the friar who started this university in 1855, Father Panfilo de Mariano, and he wrote in the 1860s this story of the Franciscan order, and it's a story of mission, and that's the thing that he talks about. The first mission was to Italy, the second mission was to Europe, the third mission is to the world, the ever-expanding scope of Franciscan mission, but that means the effort you're making to get to know the people of that time and place. We just had a friar pass away whom I had the wonderful fortune to know as a Facebook friend for some years in his latter years, Father Pius Lu, who died at the age of 102 in Taiwan.
Jeez. Good for him.
Wow.
And still active, literally, until he was on Facebook till a few days before his death, trying to, reaching the audience of people that were reaching out to him. But someone like this is an example of a native Chinese man originally studying to be a diocesan priest in our mission, but then that was no longer an option. So he decides to join the friars who had first ministered and brought the faith to him. But that to me is the big thing that our order stands for, is the continual effort to bring the gospel to people of our time and our place. Who are these people? What is the best way, the best means of reaching the people for today? And that's something that the Franciscans have, at our best, have always tried to do well.
Think about it today. What we're doing right now is we all live hours and hours apart, but we're able to have this conversation, and it'll go all around the world. People will hear this message. It's something Tito and I are very passionate about, not only on the web, but mission in general. Tito, where's that come from for you?
The sense of mission for me, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. I've always had a service-oriented kind of heart. And I just grew up knowing wonderful priests. I grew up with a mom who was very, very faithful and made sure that I was raised in the faith, and who always demonstrated through service that our faith leads us outward, right? It leads us towards encounter. So that's where my sense of mission comes from, that our faith isn't stagnant or sterile. It doesn't leave us in one place, that it drives us out to encounter people, to share our faith through our actions as well as through our words and our ministry. And there's so many ways in which we can do that. And I think, Dominic, you've done a wonderful job of doing it through teaching, through, sharing our intellectual tradition and continuing to do so. You're on a committee now that's helping to kind of look at our intellectual tradition and not just preserve it, but share it in a new way. How's that project coming along?
It's challenging. One of the things this is a group called the Commission for the Franciscan Intellectual Spiritual Tradition, and it started back in 2001. And for about the first 15 years, we were concentrating on print material. And it's interesting, just before COVID hit, we began making efforts to move to more online and the use of the internet. And of course, a very big project that we were involved in was, we were able to do this thanks to the Franciscan Institute here at St. Bonaventure and the gracious permission of New City Press, the publisher of the hard material. But we were able to put online all the early Franciscan documents, the 3 volumes,
Huge help.
3 volumes of Francis of Assisi early documents and the Clare early documents, so that all the early Franciscan sources are available now online. And this is a tremendous tool for the Franciscan world, especially for Franciscans in Africa and in Asia, a lot of times who don't have access to the print materials. Also, our Poor Clare sisters many times don't have access to a lot of these print materials. So what we have to do now is how do we develop more online tools for the Franciscan tradition.
I can tell you that, like, even my mom has made use of them through me, of course. But my old high school where I graduated from, they started a house program like many British schools do, and they named their houses after the saints. My mom is the dean for House Francis. And so she's always asking me for Franciscan resources, things about history, what are significant events and dates coming up. So I've used my access as a friar to help share some of that information with her. And so it's reaching a lot of people, not just the friars and those in other countries, but lay people who want to use that information in really important ways, active ways.
And I think so important because when you look at the Franciscans, for me, we have kind of a general sense of what a Franciscan is through art, through media. You know, we're kind of the portly drunk friar that's just kind of happy-go-lucky, right? You think about these images. I think people know pretty intuitively what a Jesuit is, and they know what a Dominican is because they have a very clear sense. You know, Dominicans, they preach, and Jesuits, they go on mission. We don't quite have that clear definition of what a Franciscan is. I'm wondering, you know, we can intuit what a friar is by being around us, and I think we'd say maybe hospitable, or we'd say fraternal or something like that. But how would you describe the Franciscan charism?
I think our order in recent years has emphasized most of all, you know, our general constitutions, what talk about what we are as Franciscans, begins with the phrase, the order of Friars Minor is a brotherhood. That is the key note. The key note for being a Franciscan always is not what we do. We are not defined, we're not, as you said, we're not at, quote, an order of preachers, like the Dominicans, but their official name is the Order of Preachers. We're the Order of Lesser Brothers, which says we are first and foremost a brotherhood, but we're a brotherhood shaped of people who are lesser ones, that we want to be the servants. We want to serve others as brothers. But we're defined by our relationship is what defines us. Our brother Michael Blastic, who recently deceased, you know, one of his last things was putting up a video in which he talked about Franciscan cookie jars, or the friar cookie jar.
Yep.
He said, you don't have, he said, nothing, you know, we don't have Jesuit cookie jars or Dominican cookie jars.
Right.
Part of it is we Franciscans, our brotherhood, we enjoy the good gifts of God's creation. We rejoice in God's good gifts. We're always happy to celebrate with other people and share the fullness of life with them. So maybe the chubby friar in one way is a spoof, but it's also the fact that we do enjoy life, we enjoy one another because it's God's good gift. But how do you?
And we're not afraid of the world.
No,
I think that's
Right.
so important. I think there are so many religious today.
And that is.
Yeah, they're afraid of it. Many of them.
Well, St. Francis said, the devil rejoices most of all when he can share or when he can take the joy that people have from them. And there's so many people that life is a burden and a pain, and we try to address the sorrows and pains that people are experiencing so that they can enjoy the fullness of life. They can enjoy the blessings of life with their sisters and brothers and enjoy all the good gifts that the Lord is giving them. And that's always a challenge.
Well, talking about the brotherhood and transitioning to a challenge, you didn't just study the ideals. You didn't just look to history. After a while, you were thrust into leadership. You became the vicar provincial of our province, second in command, the vice president. You had to see the brothers in reality. And that can often be a challenge because we have this ideal of what we should be, and then you see us how we are. What was that like to be in such a pastoral, fraternal position to see the brothers as they are?
Well, in one way, being a teacher most of my life, that job is entailed with very incomplete people who are students, who are struggling, who are on the way. And as a teacher, you're helping a lot of people to discover their dreams, their visions, their strengths, their weaknesses. So it's something I had a lot of practice doing in one way, to accept people, especially also the task of working in internal formation with young friars, being their mentors, being a person who's challenging them to grow in their life as friars. So you, as a teacher, you're in touch right from the start with people who are incomplete, who know they're incomplete. Unfortunately, we learn dealing with human beings, we're always incomplete. And just because people are solemnly professed, just because people are ordained, they're still dealing with gaps in their life for weaknesses and with struggles. So it's learning, using the skills that I learned in some ways over 25 or 30 years dealing with the younger students, and realizing that we never completely, in that sense, quote, grow up. We're never completely mature. And how,
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
How do I continue to, in that sense, be a mentor and being a support?
I wonder if you can think of specific friars over the years that may not have made the news, may not have done extraordinary things for everyone to know, but inspired you. This podcast is called Minor Characters, and we want to highlight those people. You are the historian. You're the one who knew these people intimately. Who's someone that I should know about that maybe passed away 40 years ago?
Well, let me tell you one that passed away, let's see, what is this, 40 years? Probably getting almost close to 50 years ago, but a friar that really much modeled Franciscan life to me when I was a young student here at St. Bonaventure, and that was a friar that today most people wouldn't even know the name. His name was Brother Ferdinand Wehrli, who was here at St. Bonaventure almost his whole religious life. He was born in Germany, and very interesting in our Holy Name province. We were getting a lot of vocations to the order, especially after 1910, 1915. Large numbers of young Americans wanted to join the order, but very few of them wanted to be brothers. They were most of these Americans were very much on a path of upward mobility. They were immigrants. They wanted to succeed. Most of them wanted to study for the priesthood. And actually, our province stood in great need of men who wanted to be brothers. And we went back to our roots in Germany and got a lot of young German friars to volunteer to come to America to serve in our province. But because the Germans were a little different, they still had a strong tradition of pride in manual trades. People who were tailors and maintenance men and cooks, who really took great pride in that was their skill, that was their gift. But much more than that was the fact that they were committed totally as brothers to live our Franciscan life. And I wanted to say something about Brother Ferdinand. He fought in the Kaiser's army in World War I, and he was gassed.
Wow.
He was gassed in the trenches. Ooh. And so his health was in some ways broken, they said you should work outside as much as you can. So when he came to the United States, just out of novitiate as a young professed friar, he volunteered. He got in a train down in New York and arrived here in Allegheny, New York on the railroad, and he stayed here the rest of his life.
Wow.
But he spent a lot of his life working on the gardens here at St. Bonaventure and did a great work of beautification. There's a plaque in honor of him on the gate when you come into the university today. But many students here at St. Bonaventure at the time remember him as this brother who you did work for, but then he fed you hearty sandwiches and gave you a bottle of beer. Of course, at that time, most of the students could drink because it was 18, the drinking age was 18.
Yeah.
But Brother Ferdinand took care of you, this warm man who was a hard worker, who was very, very affirming. And I got to know him actually through my good friend, Casey may have remember him down in Washington, Bob Tosha, who was my classmate up here at St. Bonaventure before I came in the order. And Bob was a sacristan as an altar boy at his parish down in Silver Spring, Maryland, and which we later took over, St. Camillus. I had never served Mass as a kid, so Bob broke me in with that. But he also brought me into contact with Brother Ferdinand, and his example and kindness and work ethic in so many ways was really a model for me. As I say, he was a very happy friar, very joyous friar.
Well, it's interesting. So someone like that didn't accomplish extraordinary things,
no,
right? You know,
no.
They've never been president. They didn't make lots of money. Nothing that this world would really laud. But think about the impact he had simply planting flowers all around campus and the beautification of the world around us.
Yeah,
the kindness.
Yes.
I'm sure he impacted thousands of people.
And some of my friars' teachers the same, who are not necessarily big scholars. See, at that time, you could teach undergraduates that with the general practice in American colleges and universities, you could teach undergraduates with a master's degree, not necessarily a doctoral degree, especially if you were not teaching advanced courses and doing, like the 100 and 200 level in history or English or whatever. And so many of the friars who taught me here did not have, quote, doctorates, but yet they were excellent teachers and were able to relate with the students as mentors and guides. I still remember another friar that I would mention that friars who were here at St. Bonaventure recall, because he was here until he died in the early 2000s, was a friar, Gervais White, who you could do a history of St. Bonaventure University with the jobs he held here. No big jobs, but very important jobs in terms of service to people. He was the chaplain for many years, but he taught me history. I shouldn't say history. It was theology, in 1962, the year the Second Vatican Council opened, and Gervais had had enough European teachers when he was studying at the University of Notre Dame for his master's degree. And I still remember him saying prophetically in 1962, we'll never recognize the church again. I remember him saying that in 1962.
Yeah.
And at that time, people were saying, well, maybe we'll do something like go to English and liturgy, but few people understood in some ways and saw the way that this, rather basic friar got the insights that this is going to launch a process that is really going to make the church a totally different reality than what we grew up with in the 40s and 50s and early 60s.
And not just in a superficial way either, not just the language and the kind of liturgy, but not that the liturgy is superficial, but I think even the sense of mission was restored and catapulted with Vatican II in a completely different way. The way we related with the world was completely different. And so I think people will hear that and say, oh, yep, we lost so much with the church. I think it brought the church to fruition in many ways, back to kind of the apostolic sense of what it means to be a Christian.
Yes.
And unrecognizable from maybe some of that kind of cultural Catholicism that admittedly we've very much lost. We're not as unified as we were before, but there is definitely a sense that is maybe better, maybe worse, that is completely unrecognizable.
Mm-hmm. I think there's always a question, there's always, whenever there's change like that, you lose some things, you gain certain things. I think the real question is if what we've lost is worth what we've gained. I think that's the real question.
And is the core still the same?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your take on that, Dominic?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Vatican II down
I think looking back, we have to. In fact, I was doing a little errand for our brother David Convertino, and looking at he was written up little biographies of the friars who were director of our St. Anthony's Guild over its history. We're celebrating 100 years of this effort of St. Anthony's Guild, and little sketches of the different people who led us. But we can see now, looking back at the immediate years after the Second Vatican Council, there was a tendency in the midst of change, to use that saying, to quote, throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, in the zeal for what was new, did we undermine certain things that we needed for our continuity? I think that's one of the things always with the history of any institution is, how do you maintain the things that make the basic things that make people have a basic identity and feel at home as a grounding, and yet at the same time that grounding though gives them the confidence to accept change and even radical changes because they know who they are and they know what their grounding is. And I think, how do we try to maintain that theological ground, but at the same time, that gives us the confidence to be people who can accept change and move with change.
For the people who don't know, can you explain briefly what is the St. Anthony's Guild? Because we talk about it all the time. We're very familiar with it, but I think there's going to be people who are unfamiliar with it.
Okay, again, that was a unit of the old Holy Name province, because all the different provinces had a fundraising apparatus. It's very interesting when it comes to raising money. Franciscans always have turned to St. Anthony, not St. Francis, because it's one of the paradoxes that this very basic man of the people has been always a saint who's appealed to artists, intellectuals, and people, in direct service to the poor. But the person that has appealed as the great wonder worker and a saint of popular devotion has been the figure of St. Anthony. It's very interesting that this man who was a very educated preacher has been the saints that appealed oftentimes to, quote, the little person in the streets, the Italian grandmother.
He's just more attainable? I mean,
well, maybe that's it.
Anthony
maybe
is a little bit more relatable.
Maybe that's it.
Francis,
Yeah.
forget about it. I mean, you think
radical.
about a guy who starved himself and wore tattered clothes and was kind of up and down all the time. I mean, I don't know if I'd give that guy money, but St. Anthony, he's an upstanding individual, a beautiful preacher, holds the child Jesus in his arms. That's beautiful.
I think, again, not to go back to Holy Name Province, but I will, that most of the people who were joining the order, as I alluded to before, were children of immigrant families. Kids who were maybe first, second generation Irish or German immigrants, and then increasingly with Polish and other immigrants from Eastern Europe, with Italian immigrants, new arrivals in the country. These people did not have the means of getting a college education, so that the Franciscans, we basically didn't charge anything for people who came to our minor seminary. And then you have novitiate. Then you have, at that time, 6 years of students, young friars who were not producing anything, but who were consumers of 2 years.
There are many like that are very old as well.
2 years of undergraduate college education yet after the minor seminary, plus 4 years of theology. At one time, in the 1920s, Holy Name Province had more people in formation than we did solemnly professed friars.
Wow.
There was more
What a time of
people.
growth.
Yeah,
More
seriously.
people in the conveyor belt, if you will, as young students preparing to go to novitiate, and then as early as friars newly professed getting the education they need to move along.
You talk about that conveyor belt. You've got all those people coming through, and that's so different from our world today. And I think people will look
you're
back
not
to the
kidding.
20s through the 50s, maybe even a little later than that, and say, like, that was the real church, and now we're in decline. We are in decline, but it seems to me that time was also an anomaly. Did we ever see that number of vocations throughout history?
We had a lot of vocations. What was very important to see, it wasn't until the 1860s that you start seeing the idea of a class of people moving along through formation. And that was due to the fact that the invention of, quote, the minor seminary. For Franciscans, the first minor seminaries were not until the 1860s in Italy. And that was a group of people who came in as a class and were formed together. And already at that time, in the towns and cities, with the rising industrialization of Europe, the cities were beginning to fall away from the practice of the faith and the impact of the French Revolution and all of that. But the faith was still very strong in the rural areas of Europe, on the farms, in the villages. The question was, how do those people get an education? And so the order began developing these minor seminaries to give a low-cost education to basically the peasants of Europe, to give
we
them
invent
the
that?
skills. Pardon?
Did others have minor seminaries?
They just started around that time.
But we as Franciscans invented that?
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Oh, okay. I thought it would be another
Because
feather in our cap.
because certainly the Jesuits and some of the other orders
beat
had
us to
a school system.
Sure.
But we, in terms of this, for people studying for the
yeah.
order, that it was something for the order was new and different. But anyway, the St. Anthony's Guild was we needed to get funding for all these students. And also in the 1920s, we were beginning our own foreign mission, and that was originally in China. So we had to support our foreign missionaries, that beginning mission effort, and all these young people, young guys who were studying to be future friar priests especially. And so that was the St. Anthony's Guild started as the fundraising arm to support the education of the friars. And of course, later on, the care of our elderly members. At that time, most friars were not living long enough to need a lot of care. You died in your boots.
Not 80 and still working like today.
Right. Yeah, right.
Well, Dominic, so I know you have to run in a minute, but I want to ask you this question. The name of our show is Minor Characters, and you talked about minor, some of those lesser-known people, but also characters. We have been known throughout our history as a bunch of characters. In your time, who comes to mind as that character?
Goodness. Oh, my goodness.
Remembering this is a family show.
Right.
I mean, one thing I maybe prime you. I think of Agapetus. I never got to meet him.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a good... Agapetus was another one of these German brothers who came over. And he was a very skilled woodworker and carpenter. I would even say woodworker more than
obviously not skilled a lot. He had some mistakes, right?
Well, he had some mistakes because over the years he cut off a number of his fingers, and unfortunately for him, a finger that remained was one which people give a threatening gesture sometimes at other people.
Tough to hail a cab.
The one finger salute.
Yes, the one finger salute. But again, he was a character in the sense of he had his habits in terms of certain things that he would eat and not eat. Certain things that, like one of our brothers, another one of our great characters was another one of our brothers, Brother Elziar.
Don't know him.
He was a famous one. He was for years at Siena College and had a garden there, and his prime food
I've heard.
was garlic. Garlic was the secret to health. So when you got on the elevator with Brother Elziar, you knew it.
Yep. Wasn't there also a German friar whose response to everything was, "Yeah, my dear"?
Well, that was Agapetus.
That was Agapetus? That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dear.
But actually but he worked in Rome many years, and so he picked up some Italian expressions. So he said he used the Italian expression for dear caro, Italian.
Yes.
So, yeah, caro. It's kind of mixing languages.
I just remember John Ulrich, J.U. That's right.
J.U., oh, yes.
J.U.
Wonderful friar.
Yeah. He was absolutely wonderful, and really had such a lasting impact on all the guys in formation who lived with him. I don't think it's a small thing to say. He taught us how to age and die graciously and gracefully. But he would tell stories of Agapetus, and he would admit himself that he would get frustrated and he was a little high strung in his younger days, and he would tell Agapetus, don't do this, whatever it was, XYZ, don't do these things. And Agapetus would go, yeah, my dear, and then he'd come back 2 days later, and he had done all the things he said not to do.
Yes. Well, Agapetus could be stubborn. It's interesting. One of the great blessings of the friars is living with people with different backgrounds and actually ethnicities. It's not so much today, but back when I came in the order, and a lot of people were, if not the children, still the grandchildren of immigrants. And John Ulrich, J.U., was very much a person who reflected his German background.
Yep.
And he was German American, but nonetheless German in the sense of his determination to carry out the assigned task given him. And as he struggled with illness, he still very much said, I've been given this job, and as long as God gives me the strength, I'm going to do this job.
Yep. That's how
he was one. He had such a reputation, a formidable one. Like, you didn't mess with him, and he was going to do things a certain way. And he was the person in charge of the finances for our house. And so you enter with a little bit of that, but he softened, I think, towards the end of his life, and he began to focus on the things that really mattered and not, every little penny. And so I remember going to him one time, and something didn't go right, and I was like, J.U., I messed this all up, and I had to spend more money and all this. And he just smiled. He's like, it's just money. It's like, okay.
That's right.
And I think when you get close to your own mortality, you're like, what difference does it make? Did you live a good life of virtue? Did you follow Jesus? You can't take the money with you. It's just money. We worry too much about it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dominic. So good to have you here. So
you're
good
welcome.
To hear your
You're welcome.
stories.
It was good to be with you, spend some time with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We hope that you get a day off, though. Make sure that they don't work you too hard.
Well, yeah, that's okay. I'm happy. I'm happy to be able to do work.
Yeah, what a blessing.
Well, thank you very much, and God bless your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What a guy, Tito. What a guy. Do you remember his classes?
Awesome. I do, especially at Bonaventure. I got to sit in our classes before going on to Novitiate. That was actually my first experience of Dominic, and I just remember we had our classes, we had the lectures, and then we would take these like nice long breaks because we were there for like 3 hours. And I would pause and follow him to the cafe where we would go get coffee or whatever, and just stick with him because he just kept. That's when he would tell the stories. He would give the lectures during class, and the stories came in between. And that's what I loved. So I was just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna hear a good story here, so I'm gonna wait and just walk with him.
It's all about the stories. I think it makes
That's
history
right.
so interesting because history is not just dates and facts. It's about people who lived this life. And you can't just get the raw data. You've got to remember the people that actually lived it. And so I think that's what we're doing here. We've got some great episodes coming up. We hope that you've enjoyed so far. We're 3 episodes in. But man, we've got a lot of friars in this world, and we've got a lot of stories. So be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to hit that bell. If you're on a podcast, share it with someone else. I don't know what you can do with podcasts, but leave us feedback. We'd love to hear it. We thank you for listening. Catch you next week.